بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. Previously, we discussed the relationship between hadith and fiqh and mentioned briefly the madhab as an institution. And of course, the origin of a madhab is an individual scholar known as a mujtahid mutlaq. So now we'd like to elaborate on that status, as well as those scholars that are of a lesser status, so that when we read or hear the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, ask the people of the remembrance if you do not know. We actually know who Ahlul Dhikr, the people of the remembrance, are. It's a reference to the scholars, and in particular, jurists, al-fuqaha, because they are the ones who are going to answer our practical questions. So we have to have a familiarity with the ranks of the jurist. مراتب al-fuqaha. We've already mentioned the top jurist, and that is al-mujtahid al-mutlaq, also referred to as al-mujtahid al-mustaqil. So whenever we just say the term mujtahid without qualification, that's who we are referring to. The unrestricted jurist, the independent jurist. After him is another type of jurist. However, this jurist can be at the same level or almost at the same level as the mujtahid mutlaq. And that is the mujtahid muntasib. Muntasib. The mujtahid who is ascribed to someone else's methodology. So this individual is a mujtahid in his or her own right. However, due to their overall agreements with another mujtahid whom they were a student of, they take the ascription of that mujtahid. So for an example, in the Shafi'i school, he had three main students: Al-Buwayti, Al-Muzani, and Al-Rabi' Al-Muradi. These three were also top-level scholars, and they have opinions, particularly Al-Buwayti and Al-Muzani, that disagree with Ash-Shafi'i, but they're entitled to that disagreement because of their level. But due to the fact that they were Ash-Shafi'i's students, and overall followed his methodology in ijtihad, they are labeled as Shafi'is. And then after them, meaning after the mujtahid muntasib, there is mujtahid muqayyad, mujtahid muqayyad, also called mujtahid al-madhhab, mujtahid al-madhhab. So that is the restricted jurist, meaning he is restricted by the principles of his imam. He doesn't have his own independent principles, but he operates according to the principles of a higher level scholar, his imam. And they're also called the jurist of the school. So that indicates that they have a mastery of the school, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. So that is mujtahid muqayyad or mujtahid al-madhhab. And after the mujtahid muqayyad, you have mujtahid al-fatwa. Mujtahid al-fatwa, which is the jurist of legal opinions, literally translated, the jurist of fatwas. And after him, and this is the lowest level of jurisprudence and legal scholarship, there is the naqil, which simply means the transmitter. So we'll go back and briefly describe each one of those types of jurists. So the mujtahid mutlaq has qualifications and prerequisites. This is called sifat al-mujtahid and shurut al-ijtihad. So the qualifications of the mujtahid, they are mastery of ayatul ahkam and ahadithul ahkam. That's first and foremost. Mastery of all of the ayat in the Quran that pertain to legal rulings. And they are numbered at approximately 500 in consideration of those ayat that were revealed specifically to legislate. But you can extract rulings from more than just those 500, but that's what is intended when we give that number. Okay, so approximately 500 ayat are ayatul ahkam. And then there are ahadithul ahkam, all of the hadith that are about legal rulings, right? Commands and prohibitions. And those number in the thousands. We'll say about 3,000, give or take, when you look at all of the asanid. And this is based on works of takhrij. And I'm giving that as a loose number. It's not exact. Some works have 2,000, others have 1,500. So it's depending on what you're referring to. But it's a lot of material. But that is the source material of al-ijtihad. of legal scholarship and jurisprudence. So mastery of ayatul ahkam and ahadithul ahkam. And when we say mastery, we don't mean just knowledge of those ayats and knowledge of those ahadith. But what we mean, in addition to just knowing what they are, knowing that they're there, also what we mentioned entails that there is an understanding of what in usul al-fiqh is called dalalatul alfaz, the signification of words. And that is what we use to read ayatul ahkam and ahadithul ahkam. You have to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, what the wordings indicate. So, for example, you have to know, or the mujtahid has to know, al-am wal-khas, general and specific wordings. Al-mutlaq wal-muqayyad, unrestricted and restricted qualified wordings. One has to, the mujtahid has to know ظاهر and mu'awwal, the muhkam. What is the apparent sense of a wording? What is an interpretation of the meaning of a wording? What doesn't accept any interpretation? It only has a single meaning. All of this is involved in knowing those texts. So that's the first qualification. Ma'rifa ayatul ahkam wa ahadithul ahkam, with understanding the dalalat, the significations. After that, the mujtahid has to also know another major proof of the sharia, which is qiyas, analogy. The mujtahid must know how to do analogy, what are the meanings of the sharia, in order to understand what's called an illah, the reason or cause for a ruling, and how that is applied. The mujtahid has to have mastery of qiyas. So that's number 3. Now, those 3 are the source materials of ijtihad. The mujtahid reads ayat, he reads the ahadith, and he understands them, and he can do qiyas based on the rulings that he takes from the texts. But there's also qualifications in the sense of prerequisites before he can actually engage in ijtihad. So those prerequisites are knowledge of an-nasikh wal-mansukh, what is abrogating or abrogated in the sharia. Also, al-ijma', where are those issues where the scholars unanimously agree? The mujtahid must know al-ijma' so that that ijma' is not violated, it's not broken. When it relates to examining ahadithul ahkam, there has to be knowledge of ulumul hadith, the sciences of hadith, which means they know the chains of hadith, they know ar-ruwah, which is called ilm al-rijal, they know the narrators of hadith, so they know what to accept and what not to accept according to their methodology. They have to know what is mutawatir, what is continuously mass transmitted, versus what is ahad, singularly transmitted. So all of that goes under ulum al-hadith. That's a prerequisite of ijtihad. It's a lot of knowledge. And then we mention these last because out of all of the things that we've described so far, what identifies the scholar is not having an abundance of information, but having mastery of the tools of knowledge, al-alat. So here, the mujtahid must be proficient in the Arabic language. Imagine somebody saying that I have studied Islam in depth and they don't know Arabic. You can't. You won't have access to the texts. So, knowledge of the Arabic language, al-lugha, vocabulary, al-nahu, grammar, and al-sarf, morphology. Because if there's no Arabic and proficiency in Arabic, there's no understanding the language of the revelation to extract rulings from in the first place. So knowledge of the Arabic language and usul al-fiqh, the fundamentals, the principles of fiqh, how to extract rulings, particularly when there is conflict in the evidences. That is the main qualification that distinguishes the mujtahid mustaqil from everyone else. It's that the mujtahid mustaqil has his own independent usul, his own principles, his own methodology for extracting the rulings. So those are the qualifications and prerequisites for the mujtahid mutlaq. At the next level is the mujtahid muntasib, and we said they have basically the same qualifications as the mustaqil. So we don't have to go into detail in that regard. After that, there is the mujtahid muqayyad or mujtahid al-madhab, the restricted jurist, the jurist that specializes in a school. And this individual possesses high qualifications. They can understand the Quran, they can understand the Sunnah. Of course, they're proficient in the Arabic language, proficient in usul. They know the madhab of their imam, and they know it so well. They have mastered the principles of the school so well, it's as if you were to ask them, you would be asking the imam himself. But what's the difference? They're not following their own independent usul. They, to the contrary, are dependent on the imam that founded those usul. So that's who they're following. They don't have independent usul, but they are subject to the usul and the qawa'id, the rules of ijtihad that have been laid down by the imam. So that's mujtahid muqayyad. And then, lesser than that, there is the mujtahid al-fatwa. And before we get into mujtahid al-fatwa, let me mention that in the Shafi'i school, the mujtahid al-madhab or muqayyad, in our school, these individuals are called ashab al-wujuh. literally the possessors of faces. But faces in this context, al-wajh, it means an opinion, an authoritative expert opinion in the school. Okay? That's a little Shafi'i trivia for you. But anyways, back to Mujtahid al-Fatwa. Mujtahid al-Fatwa is one who is lesser than the mutlaq and the muqayyad. What the Mujtahid al-Fatwa is qualified to do is to look at the opinions of the higher category or higher categories if there's disagreement among them. So a Mujtahid mutlaq might have more than one opinion on a single issue, as well as the Mujtahid muqayyad also might have different opinions on a single issue. And with the Mujtahids of the madhab, they can disagree with one another. So Mujtahid al-Fatwa, he comes along and he examines the disagreements within a school. And based on his qualifications, his proficiency in the usul of the school, the principles of the school, and the evidences of the school, and looking at the evidences of each individual scholar, he's able to determine and evaluate what is the strongest opinion in the school. That's where he operates. He operates in evaluating the opinions of the scholars that preceded him. That's his specialization. And then, after the Mujtahid al-Fatwa, you have an-Naqil, the transmitter. And that's the lowest level of fuqaha. And Naqil means transmitter, and that's what the transmitter is qualified to do. To transmit the madhab. To transmit the opinions of, for example, ash-Shafi'i. To transmit the opinions of ashab al-wujuh, again, for example, in the Shafi'i school. To translate the opinions of those ulama that are Mujtahid al-Fatwa. Now, the Naqil, the transmitter, isn't coming up with anything new. He's not doing his own ijtihad on settled issues. He's not evaluating, he's not evaluating opinions where there's disagreement, but he's simply transmitting. This is also called Hafiz al-Madhab, someone who has memorized the opinions of the school, particularly the mu'tamad, the relied upon opinions. So those are the different levels. Now, there's one last thing we would like to mention so that we don't get it confused. When we speak about the lowest level, the naqil, the transmitter, that's not a disparagement of knowledge in that person. So being at the lowest level of scholarship, and that would include all of the fuqaha of today, they're at the level of transmitter, naqala. That's all the scholars today do when it comes to settled issues. That status is not due to ignorance of the evidences. It's not due to incompetence, but rather that's the level of scholarship that is achieved today due to the fact that there's nothing new in terms of usul to be introduced. It's very important. However, the transmitter can reach a very high level of scholarship to the extent that he or she is proficient in the usul. In fact, to properly be even at that level of the naql, there has to be a high level of proficiency in the evidences and the principles of a madhab. And why is that the case? Because there's always going to be new issues. How is the transmitter going to give a fatwa on something that only occurred in his or her lifetime? It's through looking at the tradition, looking at the structure of the madhab, and based on mastery from that perspective, doing qiyas, analogy, on the new issues to come up with a ruling that is consistent with the principles of the school. All right. So even though the naql is the lowest level of faqih, even that level is high in terms of the proficiency that is required, the knowledge that is required, and also the gravity of the responsibility when new issues do come up. So again, just to reiterate, the maratib of the fuqaha, there is mujtahid al-mutlaq or al-mustaqil, al-muntasib, that goes with the mutlaq, so we won't count that one as something separate. And then mujtahid al-madhab, also called the muqayyad. And then mujtahid al-fatwa. And then the naqil, the transmitter. So when we ask who the people of knowledge are, or excuse me, when we have a question, we ask the people of knowledge. Now we know who the people of knowledge are. Ahlul dhikr, the people of the remembrance. So if we're asking someone that's not even at the level of a naqil, a transmitter of a madhab, we've done ourselves a disservice and have not fulfilled the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on who to ask. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq and taysir. Jazakumullahu khairan for listening. And we will see you on the next one, where we speak, inshaAllah, on how to approach the books of fiqh. Why they were written, how they were written, who they were written for, and how to benefit from them. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum.